I am.
Well, sailors are
out of more compassion than anything else.
So your nuttiness attraction is a compassionate nuttiness attraction?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to the people that other people won't talk to.
Okay. That's probably good, though. I mean, that's a good thing.
That's just straight up sailor talk there.
It seems like nothing good could come from the rest of this conversation.
Because I feel that we'll have a lot in common, perhaps.
If you're nutty and I'm nutty, then we'll be fine.
Is this the actual timepiece that you wear when you wear a timepiece?
When I scuba dive?
Oh, is that what it is?
No, I wear this watch. That one. But I got that watch. It was on sale on Amazon. And I really like it. I just can't figure out how to change the time. I can't. I mean, I have.
You mean like when you move from time zone to time?
Or yeah, when the time changes. I don't understand how. It's a watch so advanced, you can't change the time.
Please welcome to the stage, Todd Conklin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Pre-Accident Podcast. I am your host, Todd Conklin. What do you think about that fancy welcome to the stage, huh? I just spoke at a meeting where they played those for everyone that went on stage, and I was so excited the whole day. I listened to them. Welcome to the stage, Joe Johnson. Welcome to the stage, Matt Comfer. Welcome to that. And then when I went up, they didn't play it because I guess I started too early. It's my fault. I can't blame anybody. I started too early with my presentation because, you know, I'm always chomping at the bit. I'm a bit chomper. Chomperero. I don't know what it's called. Anyway, this is the podcast. I'm glad you're here. It's been nothing but exciting. I'm telling you, nothing but exciting the last couple weeks. I have had the best time at a whole bunch of places with a whole lot of people, and it's been so much fun to see everybody and to get out and to hang out with you and to have a good time. And mostly what excites me, if you must know, and you must know this, is how good the work that is being done is being done. Holy guacamole. It's remarkable. It's hard to measure stuff that doesn't happen, but I'm willing to bet you pretty good dinero that a lot of stuff is not happening because of the work you're doing. And that, my friends, is really important that we celebrate. I don't think we get enough time. But in the midst of the celebration, there are those catastrophic failures, and I've been working on some of those as well. And they're hard because you're not going to make it. Somebody didn't make it. Something bad, the worst possible thing that could happen happened. And in the midst of that, it becomes important for us to understand the value of really two things. Restoration, that our job is to restore, and the important point that we can't meet pain with pain. I mean, making people feel worse doesn't make things better. It just doesn't. Growing and learning and improving is really our watchword. Good work done well for the right reasons. That's what we do. Good work done well for the right reasons. There's a whole safety moment about that. You might have heard it. I think it's a really important way to think about what success looks like. Good work done well for the right reasons. If that's our test, then that's the test we want to pass. And that's what we do. That's in fact, the work we do. And for me, it's never better than when I have a great experience or even a sub-great experience when I'm out, doing the stuff we do. Mostly what I want to do is lay around and eat candy. That is kind of my ultimate goal for everything. I don't get to do it that much, but I try. I mean, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to be in this equation, on the candy eating side of the equation. That's my goal. Yes, my goal. Okay, so today's podcast, I should get into it because it's a little longer, is two of the greatest people in the whole world. You're going to love them. It's Mark Homeyer and Ted Finley. Now, Mark is a vessel master. He's a boat captain. Actually, so is Ted. Mark really is just a super impressive human being, and I've wanted to get him on the podcast forever, but he's always been somewhat hesitant. And so Ted and Mark came to Santa Fe for a little visit with their families, and we had a marvelous time. Couldn't have had more fun. I mean, seriously, if you'd make us have more fun, I don't think we could have squeezed it in. But we sat down and did a podcast, and so you're going to hear really Mark Homeyer and Ted Finley and myself just kind of talking about the world. Now, Ted is the world famous Tugboat Ted. He's a safety guy who works with Ship's Assist, I believe is how they call it in the business. You and I would call it tugboats. And we're just going to have a conversation, and you're invited. You heard part of it because pretty much what you heard in the intro is what's going to happen. But now I want to take some time and let you listen to the rest of it. So without any further ado, sit back and relax. This is the Pre-Accident Podcast with Mark Homeyer and Ted Finley. Tugboat Ted and Captain Mark. Here we go, boys. Climb aboard. What are your burning safety issues? What do you think about the journey you've been on? Maybe that's a good way to start this conversation.
Well,
Take it away, Ted.
For me, I guess I'm having some ideas or issues around people following procedures and not following procedures. And I know my crew doesn't follow procedures, and they've told me that for years.
Right.
And I get that.
Right. And
I'm kind of okay with that. But but there's some things that simply need to be done. And I had a discussion with Bob Edwards about lockout tagout.
Right.
That's procedure, right?
Isolation, right?
It's, there's if it goes wrong, it goes terribly wrong. And I've had known 2 people that have died from lockout tagout issues. So there's a personal piece for me.
Right.
And the crew often just don't see the importance of following that whole control of work process. Well, so when we get vetted by people, they want to make sure that you've got a robust permit to work system.
Right.
It's like these are things that we just can't, we're not going to negotiate.
Well,
on.
So let me ask this question: what's the purpose of lockout tagout?
Well, for me, the purpose of lockout tagout is to have a control that prevents hazardous energy.
Right. So it isolates the energy away from the worker, right?
Yeah.
So the crazy thing about the procedure for lockout tagout is that even if best done, a procedure will never isolate, right?
Sure.
It's just a formal record of how we want the work done.
Right.
And so you have to ask this question: does lockout tagout exist in procedural adherence, or does it exist in verification of energy?
In many cases, neither.
So that's,
they'll hit a breaker, but
right.
That's as far as they'll go.
Right. But they think that's sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you changed a switch in your house, how would you lock it out? Just a light switch, just like the switch that runs your bathroom fan, which, Ted, I'm imagining works really hard in your house. I don't know this, but it seems like that's something that you're good at.
Yeah, it gets a lot of work.
Yeah, that's okay. So if you're going to change that switch, how would you lock that out?
Well, I have to admit, I would just hit the breaker down below because it's just my wife and I.
And the reason is you'd hit the breaker is it's actually a sufficient isolation of the energy.
Sure.
Right? If everything goes well. Right? If you find other energy or you change the wrong switch. But a switch leg is not terribly dangerous.
True.
Right?
I agree.
And so what happens is that the guys are constantly matching what they think is an appropriate level of control with the risk that they think they see. Now, your question, which is really a great question and a pretty good place to start this discussion, is does the lockout tagout formality actually create more safety?
No, I would say the isolation is what creates the safety.
Right.
The process is more, I think, to cover your
cover
your butt
and yet the consequences really can be really serious. You can die, right? So we know the consequence is really high, but I think maybe we can. I mean, maybe if your guys. So first of all, if your guys tell you they don't follow the procedure, that's probably a good thing, not a bad thing, because they're being honest with you. Actually, I think that's
and they will be. Yeah.
I think that speaks remarkably highly, because it's much easier to tell you, of course we follow the procedure every time, because then the payoff is you go away and they get to do work any way they want to. But they're honest with you, which they know it's probably going to lead to another discussion, right? But if they're not following the procedure, maybe the better question to ask is the procedure followable? Is our lockout tagout process practical? Does it make a difference to the way we do work?
Well, we actually, reduce the procedure because we have crews of 4 working, and really only 2 are up at any one time. So one is driving the boat, the other one would be locking something out. There's literally nobody else that could flip
Right.
that switch back on. But we've had instances where they haven't flipped the switch at all, and they're working on something, and somebody comes in. The captain could start a generator, for example, from the wheelhouse, and start a generator that should have been locked out to prevent that from happening.
So introduce yourself to us, Ted.
My name's Ted. I work for...
Just Ted? It's only Ted?
Tugboat Ted.
Oh, Tugboat Ted. Okay.
He's owning it.
That's right. He is the Tugboat Ted.
I'm Ted Finley. I work in the shipping group, and my role there is safety as well as the shoreside advocate for crew members around safety and environmental issues. And then I do something called ops integrity. It's kind of our own term to talk about compliance within our management system.
I actually really like the phrase ops integrity. I mean, I think that's encompassing of everything: reliability, resilience, safety, environmental, all the things that really matter to you guys. Quality, resilience, all the things you do. And you work mostly in ships assist, right?
Well, now it's expanded a little bit. I've got offshore tugs that work in the oil field down in the Gulf, up in Alaska, as well as the ship assist group that's the entire West Coast.
But it's tugboats.
Tugboats.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's good. And Mark, introduce yourself as well.
My name is Mark Holmeyer, and I actually also work in the same group, shipping. I look after ships and articulated tug and barge units, and my group is really involved in the transportation of petroleum products. That's really by and large. So really, I mean, my title is Director of Marine Operations, but I feel like I'm really a facilitator. I'm looking to facilitate safe and effective operations, safe and reliable operations.
Yeah, those are important words. What's your feeling? Because the consequence in your world around energy isolation is actually even more significant. What's your feeling about this idea of procedures and lockout, tagout? What do you feel about procedures?
What's interesting is you kind of have two ends of the spectrum. So I don't mean to jump into Ted's world here, but that group does a ton of evolutions of the process, right? So it's, in their work, so they do thousands of these evolutions in a year, whereas a crew on a tanker would do fewer of the evolutions, and there are more people. So, but when I was listening to you have this conversation, what stuck out to me is, for me, control of work processes. I think the thing I like, we could parse the words of it, but what always comes to me about control of work processes is if they are in fact doing them prior to executing the work, then for me, the thing that's valuable is it slows them down in the execution of the work, right? So it provides this time for them to kind of soak on it before they do it. And I have to say, I believe that by and large, much of what we do, the guys are actually executing like lockout, tag out, or work from height, or hot work permitting, job safety analysis type stuff is happening prior to work, by and large. I mean, I would say that's, yeah.
It seems that safety in the maritime industry is different than safety in other industries, and it's because there's and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there's a strong sense of independence, and crews really are identified as kind of the survival unit. They work by crew. Like in my observation, the most important safety culture influence on board a vessel is the master, is the captain, right? They sort of create a culture by which operational integrity and operational discipline happens. And so you really trust the crew to make adaptive decisions in real time in highly variable conditions successfully. And it sounds like mostly what happens is they're successful, right?
Yeah, we have a super high success rate. Yes.
So why? What makes them so successful?
Oh, great.
Well, this was a hard question.
It
really?
It is.
So let me rephrase it and ask it harder. Can I ask it harder?
Yeah, make it harder.
Okay,
please.
What's happening when nothing bad's happening?
The same work for us, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, they communicate really well with one another. I mean, the crews on the ship assist boats in particular, because they've been on those vessels for so long, they can tell if somebody's eyebrow raises, what that means. So there's these really nuanced, subtle signals that they can give each other. So they're reading from the same sheet of music, if you will. And I think that verbal and nonverbal communication between them really is helpful.
So lots of those value-based trust and relationship building stuff, that's happening kind of at a nonverbal level, and it's this real intensity of the crew. What's changed since you guys have started looking at safety through kind of the new view? Or has it changed, maybe is a better question.
Well, I think there's more of the crew that are willing to have conversations about what really happens on the vessel. Part of that is my time with them, first as a survival trainer. Over about a 10-year period, I developed a sense of trust with them. They would tell me things in class that they may not be telling their bosses, right? And I think for the new view and that approach to be successful, people have to trust that they're not going to get in trouble for telling you the truth about what is really happening in the work environment.
Is that new?
I think it's new. Well, it's grown, that ability of the rest of the crew to be comfortable to say those words, to talk about the work that they do.
How do you build that trust, though, when you send out vessels every day? I mean, they're out there all the time. Once they sort of leave shore, they're no longer under the tutelage of, senior leadership, I guess, is a good way. I don't know how else to say that, right? How do you establish that trust that what you need to have happen is happening, right? Because to me, that question, what's happening when nothing bad's happening, in your industry, a lot of people are working really hard to ensure nothing bad happens. Because I think what you bring to the table is really three forms of safety. You have all the classic industrial safety, don't cut your hand, right? Don't trip, don't fall, don't hurt your back. Then you've got all, like, Mark, your guys have all this pretty high-level process safety stuff.
Sure.
Well, actually, the tugboats have all the process safety as well, right? Super strategic. You have to manage for resilience. You're building stuff so that it fails safely. You create that. And then you have the third option, which I think is really interesting, which is this whole notion of maritime safety, right? Which is a big part of it. That is a huge part of successfully operating a vessel. So you're managing really three very distinct forms of safety, and you're doing it based upon building, I guess, capacity in the crew, and then sending the crews out to do their work on their own. Right? Fair enough? Am I freaking you out? No one's ever said this before? You're looking at me like I don't have mirrors in my house. It's just my observation. I could be wrong.
I think you're spot on. I think what Ted said about trust, certainly trust is a big part of it. Also, I think a desire to learn. As soon as and this is an evolution. I mean, we've been at this for getting close to 10 years, I think.
Yeah, just about.
And I think it's a lot of it is getting people to trust you and making them understand that what we want to do is learn and grow, right? When we fail, because we know we're going to fail, what's going to keep us safe, and is that enough? You know what I mean? Do we have the processes? Do we have the capacity to fail safely?
What do those conversations look like for you guys on a normal basis? Because you have them all the time. I mean, other organizations look to you to understand this notion of safe and reliable performance.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, I look to the crews to perform the work safely. I don't need to tell them how to do the work safely. I think what I need to do is adjust to some extent, to adjust the black line to more run closer to the blue line for me. I think that's where it's at for us.
Which is almost exactly opposite of how we started this conversation, because we started the conversation saying we want practice to look like the process, but now you're telling me that you really work at looking at making the process reflect the practice. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's where I'm leaning, but I always get pushback from other shoreside managers around that the procedures are sacrosanct, that it must be done this way.
Right.
And I recognize that it's not done this way because
it can't be done this way.
It can't be done that way. And so it's important for me to listen to the crew to find out, so what are your challenges? What sorts of things would keep you safe? So if we come back to the idea of lockout tagout, for me, not knowing any of the external contributing factors would be a lock is, to me, the safest way to isolate that particular equipment, or a blank and tagged out. But for a person working by themselves, and I have to admit myself, changing that light switch in my house, the lock doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Because I'm comfortable in knowing that somebody's not going to come in and hit that switch while I'm working on it. And, assuming that all the secondary sources of power or energy have been secured. But I don't have that sense or that comfort thinking about the crews away from shore of what the various scenarios might be that are at play out there.
Right, and you can probably never imagine them all.
Through that.
Yeah, you can probably never imagine all the scenarios. Like, that's the crazy thing about your guys' work is that you just couldn't imagine all the variability. I mean, you don't know what'll fail next, but something will fail. Maybe the question I'd ask you, and this is a question I think you guys are quite comfortable with, you're just very humble, is when they do an isolation activity successfully, what happened? I mean, right? So if the goal is to keep the energy from the target, from either the person or the environment or whatever, how do they do it so successfully so much of the time? Is it luck, or is it actually just skill, just years of building sort of strong crew cultures and functioning as a effective crew?
Yes.
I know. I'm like wondering who's interviewing who. I'm a little blabby today.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but they know their business, right? They are pros at what they do.
Very much so. Yeah.
They're some of the best in the world at what they do, and that's why we can. When Mark was working with our team, we had close to 16,000 evolutions. And I think we had one OSHA recordable, no LTIs, and that was cause for celebration. But the other side of that is, wow, but something could still happen.
Well, and see, that's what's fun talking with you guys, is that organizations that are quite reliable don't feel reliable. Yeah. They don't act reliable. Yeah. And I actually think that's a huge compliment for you guys. It's a little left-handed. Not that I'm anti-left-handed. Don't get me wrong. I love left-handed. Some of my best friends are left-handed. Let's get that out there. But organizations that are really reliable don't take that for granted. They always are thinking, what could fail next? What's going to happen next time? We're good this time, but what happens next time? And that's part of what you guys both bring to your operations, for sure.
Well, that's a change for me. I think before my introduction to New View, that would have been cause for celebration and, pop the cork on the champagne. But now I think, that's, fatalities hide in successful work.
Right.
And I need to constantly be looking at those areas where there may be risk or danger for the crew and identify what those are. And all I can do is learn more from the crew to find out about the system that they work in.
So really the crew is an important resource. They're not the problem. They're the solution, right?
Yeah, because I don't do their work. I don't know it the way that they know it intimately. And so I constantly learn from them. Which is why I want to be open to this idea of control of hazardous energy to find out what really will, in fact, work, and is that enough?
Yeah. So let me ask this question. You guys flip a coin to see who goes first. What do you think has been the most important lesson you've learned on this journey the last 10 years?
Mark, you won.
Wow, that was a good coin flip.
The most important...
Yeah, in this last 10-year journey, I bet you've learned a ton of stuff. What's had the highest resonance with you?
Oh man, there's probably 10 different. I think for me, understanding or getting a better understanding of what safety actually is for me, which is sort of a dynamic. It's sort of dynamic, and it's never. You're never there,
right?
You never arrive. I think learning to listen to the crew for the answers to how to be safer, which I think is counterintuitive. As I think it's easy to. I know that sounds very dummied down and simplified, but the crew's that's where the juice is. That's where the path to the promised land is listening to what they're telling you, and getting right up next to them and being right there with them and getting them to trust you, to tell you where the gaps are that they feel that they're vulnerable at. And so I guess I'm sorry, Todd, I don't know that I'm giving you
I think it's quite good.
It's
quite good.
For me, I just want to back up because you asked a really important question at the beginning, which is, I think, where I'm spending a lot of my time and where my team spends a lot of time, and I work to focus on, is places where I'm not as caught up in slips, trips, and falls. I'm really caught up in things that can cause major catastrophes, and focusing my team, our team, in how do we get to looking at those things real seriously. And that's where
Has that been hard?
I think it's easy to get distracted by slips, trips, and fall type stuff. I think that's very distracting, and it sucks up a lot of bandwidth to focus on that. And of course, listen, we want everybody to have 100% safe evolution when they come on board and spend time. But what I really want to make sure is that they aren't seriously injured or killed.
Yeah.
And I think that's where reliability lies. But I think that there's a lot of training around. I think slips, trips, and falls focusing on that too much can kind of take your head out of the game.
I agree. I actually think it creates a bias towards managing the wrong things.
Yeah, so maybe if I guess as we kind of talk this, kind of parse this out a little bit, I think it's understanding what's really important, and not getting too focused on statistical solutions, and being comfortable with there's a certain amount of low-level noise that happens, and you just got to accept that low-level noise and keep your eyes open for the big stuff that can really change things.
Wow.
So,
thanks. That was great. Dad, what do you got? Follow that.
I think for me,
that'd be easy.
It's the notion of listening to the crew, and this is around the two fundamentals of error is normal and blame fixes nothing.
Right.
We had, and again, I give Mark credit, when he came over to our group, we really began in earnest to apply the principles of New View. And we had an investigation, and we took the learning team approach. And I asked one of the mariners involved, I said, so what did you think of this approach? And he said, without hesitation, I've never been treated so kindly in my life. And that, it just floored me. Here's a person that still has his job, and he's going to be able to, he's the world's expert on that incident.
Yeah.
And what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
And he's going to tell that story, as is the tradition in the maritime field.
Absolutely.
Is passing this wisdom down from crew to crew. And he's now, he's just a great guy. He was a great guy before it happened. He's an even better guy now that he's been treated fairly. And
he's more valuable to the company.
And he's more valuable to the company because he's an expert.
Well, and he's an expert in that failure mode.
In that failure mode, exactly. And so that was a really big learning for me. And when I find that there's a lot of, I think we carry these biases, and many of us are often willing to jump to blame first. And when you go there, you don't learn anything. And that's the key, is if you're...
Yeah, it shuts you down.
If you open yourself up, there's so much you can learn. The beginning of wisdom is to admit you know nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really the biggest thing for me.
If I were to rewrite those 5 principles, I would not say blame fixes nothing. I would say blame stops improvement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go on in your mind that flip the whole story around and change it so that it's not valuable. Yeah, it becomes almost completely unvaluable.
Thanks, you guys. Did you have a good time in Santa Fe?
Loved it.
What was the highlight?
The pet parade.
I think the pet parade is a highlight. I'll give you that as well.
Quesadilla at Pasquale's.
You had an entire case of Diaz?
Yeah.
Not just one Diaz, you had a case of Diaz. Wow.
Yes, I had a whole case.
A case of Diaz. Case of Diaz and Pasquale's and the pet parade. Pretty good. Thanks for your time, you guys. You were amazing. So that's all she wrote. That's the podcast for today. Thank you, Mark Homeyer and Ted Finley, Tugboat Ted and Captain Mark. You guys are a great group of seafarers to have a conversation with. Did I say that correctly? I could have said so many different things. Imagine what I could have said, but I said it that way. And that is pretty much our time together. I wish we had more, but I'm already 2 minutes long, so I'm long already. So sorry, I owe you 2 minutes. I'll make it up for you, I promise. Until then, my friends, keep listening to the podcast. Tell your friends. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for writing reviews. That's made a huge difference. Our numbers are gigantic. You know that, right? We have millions and millions and millions of... Do you know this? We have like 32 million downloads of this dumb podcast. I'm not even making that up. That's not even made up. That's just crazy. And I don't really understand how it all works, but we can talk about it later. Until then, my friends, learn something new every single day. Have as much fun as you possibly can. And for goodness sakes, be safe.
Please welcome to the stage Todd Conklin.